My name is Kathy, and I am 58 years old. 3 years ago, I lost my husband Frank to cancer, and since then, Christmas has never felt quite the same. But this year, I was determined to make it special again. I had spent weeks planning the perfect Christmas dinner for my son Marcus, his wife Jessica, and their two little ones. I wanted our home to feel warm and welcoming, just like it used to when Frank was alive. Little did I know that this Christmas would teach me the most painful lesson about family loyalty, and what happened at my dining table would change everything forever. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button if you can relate to family struggles during the holidays, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories. Now let me tell you about the Christmas dinner that shattered my world. After Frank passed away, I found myself rattling around in our four-bedroom house in the suburbs of Chicago. We had lived there for 25 years, watching Marcus grow up in those very rooms. The house held so many memories, from his first steps in the living room to his high school graduation party in the backyard. Frank had worked hard as an electrician to pay off the mortgage, and in his will he left everything to me. Every brick, every board, every memory was mine to cherish. Marcus was 32 now, married to Jessica for 2 years. Jessica came from money, the kind of old Connecticut wealth that made people speak in hushed, refined tones. Her father, Richard Whitmore, was some big-shot CEO of an investment firm, and her mother, Patricia, had been a corporate lawyer before retiring early. They lived in a sprawling estate in Greenwich, the kind of place you see in magazines. Before Jessica came into the picture, Marcus and I had always been close. He would call every few days, drop by on weekends, and we would sit at the kitchen table talking about everything and nothing. Those were the golden times when it felt like Frank was still somehow present in our conversations and laughter. But marriage changed Marcus. At first, I told myself it was natural for a man to focus on his new wife and growing family. Emma was 4 years old now, with Frank's bright blue eyes, and little Jake had just turned 2. They were my pride and joy, the lights of my life after losing their grandfather. However, I could not ignore the growing distance between Marcus and me. Our phone conversations became shorter and more businesslike. When I suggested visits, Jessica always seemed to have some family event or social obligation that required Marcus's presence. I started to feel like I was competing for my own son's attention, and I was losing. The holidays used to be our special time. Frank would set up the Christmas tree while I decorated every room in the house. Marcus would help his father string lights outside while I baked cookies and prepared our traditional feast. Those Christmases were filled with laughter stories and the kind of warmth that made our modest home feel like a palace. This year, I was determined to recreate that magic, even without Frank. I wanted to show Marcus and his family that our home was still the heart of our traditions, still the place where love lived and memories were made. I threw myself into Christmas preparations with a passion I had not felt since Frank died. For 3 full days, I cleaned every corner of the house until it sparkled. I polished the good china that had belonged to Frank's mother, the delicate set with tiny roses that we only used for special occasions. The silver candlesticks that had been our wedding gift were buffed to a mirror shine. In the kitchen, I prepared everything from scratch, just like my mother had taught me 40 years ago. The 20-pound turkey was brined overnight and rubbed with herbs from my garden. I made Frank's favorite stuffing with sage and cranberries, the recipe his grandmother had passed down through 3 generations. The cranberry sauce was cooked with orange zest and a hint of cinnamon, creating that perfect balance of tart and sweet that Marcus had loved since he was a little boy. I even baked his childhood favorite chocolate chip cookies, shaped like Christmas trees, complete with green frosting and tiny silver sprinkles. The house smelled like a Norman Rockwell painting come to life, with cinnamon and nutmeg dancing through every room. For the children, I had purchased thoughtful gifts. Emma received a beautiful dollhouse that reminded me of our own home, complete with tiny furniture and a family of dolls. For Jake, I found a wooden train set that I knew would capture his imagination for hours. I wrapped everything in festive paper and arranged them under the tree that I had somehow managed to decorate all by myself this year. 2 days before Christmas, Marcus called. His voice sounded different, somehow more formal and distant than usual. There was none of the warmth I remembered from our conversations when he was younger. "Mom, we are bringing Jessica's parents for Christmas dinner," he announced without any of the usual pleasantries. I was surprised, but pleased. Oh, how wonderful. I would love to meet them properly. I will set 2 more places at the table. Actually, they are very particular about seating arrangements and meal presentation. Marcus continued, his voice taking on a tone I did not recognize. Jessica thinks it would be better if you let her handle the hosting duties this year. Something cold settled in my stomach, but I pushed the feeling away. Marcus, this is my home. I have been preparing for weeks. I think I can manage to host a Christmas dinner properly. There was a long pause before he spoke again. We need to talk about some things anyway, about the future and making some changes. The way he said changes sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the December weather outside. But I told myself I was being paranoid. Surely he meant good changes, perhaps about spending more time together as a family. Of course, sweetheart. We can talk about anything you want. I just want us all to be together for Christmas. After hanging up, I busied myself with additional preparations. I rearranged the living room furniture to accommodate more guests, set up the good guest towels in the powder room, and even bought fresh flowers for the dining table centerpiece. If the Whitmores were as refined as Jessica always made them sound, I wanted everything to be perfect. Christmas morning arrived gray and cold with a light dusting of snow that made everything look like a postcard. I was up before dawn, putting the turkey in the oven and starting the side dishes that needed to simmer slowly throughout the day. By the time I heard cars pulling into my driveway, the house was filled with the most incredible aromas, and every surface gleamed with careful attention. Marcus arrived first with Jessica, and the children followed immediately by a luxury sedan that looked out of place in our middle-class neighborhood. Richard Whitmore stepped out wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He was a tall, imposing man with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from a lifetime of people saying yes to him. Patricia Whitmore emerged from the passenger side looking like she had stepped out of a country club magazine. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. She wore a cream-colored wool dress that screamed expensive designer, and her jewelry caught the morning light like tiny stars. So, this is where Marcus grew up. Richard said, his eyes scanning the front of my house with the calculating gaze of someone evaluating real estate. Quaint neighborhood, very working class. The way he said working class made it sound like a disease. Jessica performed the introductions with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Daddy, Mother, this is Marcus's mother, Kathy. Kathy, these are my parents, Richard and Patricia Whitmore. I extended my hand warmly, genuinely excited to finally meet the people who had raised the woman my son loved. Please, come in from the cold. I have coffee ready and dinner will be served in about an hour. Patricia looked around the living room with barely concealed distaste. How cozy, she murmured, though her tone suggested anything but approval. Everything is so small and close together. Richard was examining my furniture like he was appraising it for an estate sale. These pieces look like they are from the 70s. Very retro. Marcus said nothing during these exchanges, which was unlike him. The son I remembered would have defended our home, would have pointed out the love and care that went into every corner. Instead, he stood silently beside Jessica, avoiding my eyes and nodding along with her parents' subtle criticisms. Emma and Jake ran to hug me, their innocent excitement temporarily lifting my spirits. But even that joy was short-lived when Patricia commented, "Children really need more space to run around properly. This house is rather confining for a growing family." I felt like a stranger in my own home watching these people dissect my life's work with casual cruelty. But I was determined to be a gracious hostess. This was Christmas after all, and they were my son's family now. Please, everyone make yourselves comfortable. I will just check on the turkey and then we can sit down to eat. As I bustled around the kitchen making final preparations, I could hear them talking in the living room. Richard's voice carried the authority of someone used to being in charge, and I caught fragments of conversation about property values and renovation costs that made my heart skip uncomfortable beats. When I called everyone to the dining table, I felt a surge of pride looking at what I had accomplished. The table was set with our finest china crystal glasses, sparkling in the candlelight, and platters of food that looked like they belonged in a magazine. The turkey was golden brown and perfectly carved, surrounded by all the traditional sides that made Christmas dinner feel like home. I moved naturally toward my usual seat at the head of the table, the chair where Frank used to sit, where I had presided over family meals for decades. It was my table in my house, prepared with my hands and my love. But before I could even pull out my chair, Richard Whitmore cleared his throat meaningfully. He turned to Jessica with the kind of paternal authority that brooked no argument. "Honey, your mother-in-law is in my seat." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood frozen, not quite believing what I had heard. Jessica smiled that perfectly practiced smile of hers and nodded toward me. "Oh, yes, of course. Kathy, would you mind terribly giving Daddy the head of the table? He is used to leading family dinners." I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to say something, anything that would restore order to this surreal situation. Surely my son would not allow a guest to displace his own mother in her own home. Instead, Marcus stood up and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. There was something cold and calculating in his eyes, something that reminded me uncomfortably of Richard Whitmore's appraising stare. "Mom, Mr. Whitmore is our guest, and guests should be honored. You should move to the kitchen counter. There is plenty of room for you there." The kitchen counter? In my own home? At my own Christmas dinner? The words hit me like successive slaps, each one more shocking than the last. I felt the blood drain from my face as I tried to process what my son had just said to me. "Marcus," I said quietly, my voice barely steady, "this is my house. This is my dining table. Your father and I sat at this table for 25 years. Marcus's jaw tightened in a way that reminded me painfully of his teenage years when he did not get his way. But this was different. This was calculated and cruel in a way that teenage tantrums never were. "Well, maybe it is time for some changes around here. You cannot expect things to stay the same forever." Jessica laughed, a tinkling sound that held no warmth whatsoever. "Oh, Marcus, your mother just does not understand proper etiquette when entertaining people of a certain social standing." Richard nodded approvingly at his daughter's comment. "Jessica is quite right. There is a natural hierarchy to these things. I am sure Kathy understands that some adjustments need to be made for the good of everyone involved." Patricia added her voice to the chorus of disapproval. "Really, dear, it is important to know one's place in these situations. We would not want to create an awkward atmosphere for the children." Emma and Jake were watching this exchange with confused, frightened eyes. They could sense the tension, even if they could not understand the words. Emma started to cry quietly, which broke my heart even more than my son's betrayal. I looked around the table at these people who were systematically dismantling my dignity, my authority, and my sense of belonging in my own home. Marcus would not meet my eyes. Jessica wore an expression of smug satisfaction. The Whitmores sat like conquering royalty, waiting for me to submit to their authority. Slowly, with what little dignity I could muster, I rose from my chair. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I might faint from the shock and humiliation. This was not the Christmas I had dreamed of, not the family gathering I had worked so hard to create. But I moved to the kitchen counter and watched from there as Richard Whitmore took my place at the head of my own table as if it were the most natural thing in the world. From my position at the kitchen counter, I watched my own Christmas dinner unfold like a nightmare I could not wake up from. Richard Whitmore sat in my chair with the casual confidence of someone who had never doubted his right to take whatever he wanted. He carved the turkey I had prepared with the skill of a man used to being served, commenting on the quality of the meat as if he were reviewing a restaurant. "Not bad for a home-cooked meal," he announced to the table, "though I suspect the seasoning could use some refinement." Jessica nodded enthusiastically. "Oh, yes, Daddy. When we renovate this place, we will definitely need to upgrade the kitchen. Modern appliances would make such a difference in food preparation." The word renovate hit me like a thunderbolt. I nearly dropped the water glass I was holding. What did she mean by renovate? This was my house, my kitchen, my life they were discussing so casually. Marcus was nodding along with his wife's commentary, adding his own observations about what needed to be changed. "The whole place could use updating. These wood floors are showing their age, and the wallpaper in the bedrooms is practically vintage at this point." Patricia surveyed the dining room with the critical eye of someone planning a complete makeover. "Everything is so dark and closed in. With the right contractor, you could open up these spaces, create a more contemporary flow." Richard leaned back in my chair like he owned it. "Do not worry about the costs, son. Once the paperwork goes through, we will handle all the financial arrangements. Consider it our investment in your family's future. Paperwork. What paperwork? I stood there in my own kitchen listening to these strangers plan the destruction of my home, and I felt completely invisible. They were talking about me and my house as if I were not even present. The master bedroom upstairs has good bones, Jessica continued, but it will need a complete redesign, something more suitable for a young family. That was my bedroom, mine and Frank's, the room where we had whispered secrets and shared dreams, where I had held him during his final illness, where I still kept his clothes in the closet because I could not bear to give them away. Marcus was warming to the subject now, his voice gaining enthusiasm as he described his vision for transforming our family home. We could knock out the wall between the kitchen and dining room, create one of those open concept layouts, much more functional for entertaining. Excellent idea, Richard agreed. And we should definitely look into adding a 3-car garage. That driveway is barely adequate for one vehicle. Patricia had pulled out her phone and was making notes. I know the perfect interior designer in Greenwich. She did wonders with the Patterson estate last year. Very contemporary, very sophisticated. Then Richard said something that made my blood run cold. Of course we will need to find suitable accommodations for Kathy during the transition. I know a lovely senior living community about an hour from here. Very well managed, excellent activities program. Senior living community. They were planning to put me in a nursing home so they could take over my house. I gripped the edge of the counter to keep myself steady as the full scope of their plan became clear. She would be much happier with people her own age, Patricia added with false sympathy. It can be so isolating for seniors to rattling around in these big old houses all alone. Jessica nodded sagely. It really would be for the best. Marcus worries about her being here by herself, especially in the winter. At a senior community, there would always be people around, organized activities, professional care if needed. Marcus finally looked in my direction, but his expression held no warmth, no trace of the loving son I had raised. It makes perfect sense, Mom. You would have constant companionship, and we would not have to worry about you managing this big house on your own. Constant companionship, professional care. They made it sound like a vacation resort instead of exile from my own life. I realized then that this dinner, this whole Christmas gathering, had been planned as an ambush. They had not come to celebrate with me. They had come to inform me that my life, as I knew it, was over. Standing in that kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals, where I had packed countless school lunches and celebrated every birthday and holiday for decades, I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. Even when Frank died, I had not felt this abandoned, because then I still had Marcus's love and support. Now, I understood that my son had been planning this betrayal for months, maybe longer. All those short phone calls, all those canceled visits, all those times when Jessica had convenient excuses to keep Marcus away from me. They had been preparing for this moment when they would strip away everything I had left in the world. I excused myself quietly from the kitchen, claiming I needed to check something upstairs. No one at the table seemed to notice my departure. They were too engrossed in their plans for my future displacement. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. In the top drawer of Frank's dresser, underneath his old sweaters that still smelled faintly of his cologne, I kept a manila folder that contained some of the most important documents of my life. With trembling hands, I retrieved it and checked to make sure everything was still inside. 6 months ago, after noticing Marcus's growing coldness and Jessica's obvious disdain for our modest lifestyle, I had made some very difficult decisions. Call it mother's intuition, or maybe just the wisdom that comes from living long enough to recognize betrayal when it is being planned. I had consulted with an attorney, a sharp young woman named Sarah Mitchell, who specialized in estate planning. Peterson, she had said during our private meeting, if you have concerns about your son's motivations regarding your property, there are legal steps we can take to protect your interests. At the time, I had felt guilty even considering such precautions. But something in Marcus's behavior, some fundamental shift in how he looked at me and our family home, had triggered every protective instinct I possessed. The documents in the folder represented a complete restructuring of Frank's original will. Instead of leaving everything to Marcus, as had always been our plan, I had established a new arrangement. Upon my death, the house and all our assets would be divided equally among 3 local charities that had meant something to Frank and me throughout our lives. The children's hospital where Emma and Jake had been born would receive 1/3. The food bank where Frank and I had volunteered for 15 years would get another portion. The final share would go to the homeless shelter that Frank had helped build with his own hands during his retirement. Marcus would inherit nothing except his father's watch and wedding ring items that held sentimental rather than monetary value. Every dollar, every stick of furniture, every inch of property would go to organizations that actually helped people instead of exploiting them. I had also taken another precaution that none of them knew about. 3 months ago, I had quietly sold the house to the local housing authority for $1 with a life estate clause that allowed me to live here until my death. The paperwork was already filed and recorded. Even if they somehow managed to have me declared incompetent, they could not touch the house because I no longer technically owned it. Holding these documents in my hands, I felt a strength I had not experienced since Frank's funeral. These pieces of paper represented my refusal to be victimized, my determination to maintain control over my own life and legacy. I walked back downstairs with the folder tucked under my arm. The conversation at the dining table had moved on to discussing timeline for the renovations and which contractor Richard preferred for major construction projects. They were spending my inheritance with the casual confidence of people who had never doubted their right to take whatever they wanted. I set the folder down on the table directly in front of Marcus and Richard, the soft sound of paper on wood cutting through their animated discussion like a knife. "I think you gentlemen might want to see this," I said quietly, my voice carrying a calm authority that surprised even me. Richard looked up with mild annoyance at the interruption. "What is this about, Kathy? We are trying to have a family discussion here." "This is about family," I replied, opening the folder and spreading the documents across the table where they could all see them clearly. Specifically, it is about what happens to family property when family members forget how to treat each other with respect. Marcus picked up the first document, his face going pale as he read the legal language that transferred ownership of everything he thought he would inherit to people who had never once asked him to abandon his mother at a kitchen counter. "You cannot do this," he said, his voice rising to a near shout. "This house belongs to our family. Dad wanted me to have it." I looked at him with a calmness that came from finally having the power in this conversation. "Your father wanted you to have it because he believed you would take care of me. He never imagined you would try to throw me out so you could redecorate it for your in-laws' approval." Jessica grabbed the will copy, her perfectly manicured fingers shaking as she read through the provisions. "This is not legal. You cannot just give away family assets to strangers." "Actually, I can," I said, enjoying the shocked silence that had fallen over the table. "I consulted with a very good attorney. Every document has been filed properly with the county. The house sale to the housing authority was completed 3 months ago." Richard Whitmore's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is clearly the result of diminished mental capacity. We will have this overturned in court faster than you can imagine." "You are welcome to try," I replied, sitting down in a chair I pulled from the corner of the room. "But you should know that my attorney anticipated such challenges. I underwent a complete psychological evaluation before making these changes. Dr. Williams, a respected psychiatrist, has certified my mental competence in writing. Good luck explaining to a judge why you think a woman is incompetent, simply because she refuses to let herself be displaced from her own home." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma and Jake were crying now, confused and frightened by the angry voices and tense atmosphere. Patricia kept opening and closing her mouth like a fish out of water. Marcus stared at the documents as if he could make them disappear through sheer force of will. Finally, I stood up and walked to the front door, holding it open wide. Cold December air rushed into the house, carrying with it the clean scent of snow and the promise of a future I would control myself. "I think it is time for all of you to leave," I said with quiet dignity. "You came here to inform me that my life was over, that my home was no longer mine, that my place was in an institution where I could not inconvenience your plans. Now you know that the only thing ending today is your ability to manipulate and exploit my love for my son." They left in stages like actors exiting a play that had gone horribly wrong. Richard and Patricia departed first, muttering threats about legal action and psychological evaluations that we all knew would lead nowhere. Jessica followed, carrying Jake and dragging a sobbing Emma by the hand, her designer heels clicking angrily against my front porch. Marcus was the last to leave. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking back at the house where he had grown up, perhaps finally understanding what he was losing. For just a second, I thought I saw a flicker of the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and broken toys, certain that Mommy could fix anything. "Mom," he said quietly, "I never meant for it to go this far." I looked at my son, this man I had carried for 9 months, nursed through infancy, taught to walk and talk and ride a bicycle. I had attended every soccer game, helped with every school project, celebrated every achievement, and comforted every disappointment. And in return, he had tried to sell my dignity for his wife's approval and her family's money. "Yes, you did," I said simply. "You meant for it to go exactly this far. You just never imagined I would have the strength to stop you." He opened his mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. With a slight nod, he walked down the steps and got into his car. I watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner, taking with them the last vestiges of the family I thought I had. When the house was finally quiet, I sat down in my living room and looked around at the space that was truly mine again. The Christmas tree lights twinkled softly in the gathering darkness, and the scent of our untouched dinner still filled the air. It should have felt lonely sitting there, surrounded by the remnants of a holiday that had gone so spectacularly wrong. Instead, I felt something I had not experienced in months: peace. The constant anxiety about Marcus's growing distance, the worry about where I fit in his new life, the fear that I was becoming a burden to the people I loved most. All of that was gone, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had protected myself when no one else would. 6 months later, I moved out of the family home and into a beautiful 2-bedroom condominium downtown, just a few blocks from the river. The housing authority had kept their promise to let me live in the house for as long as I wanted, but I discovered that what I wanted was a fresh start in a place with no painful memories. My new home had floor-to-ceiling windows that filled every room with natural light. I joined a book club at the local library, started volunteering at the food bank where Frank and I had worked together, and made friends with other women who understood that sometimes loving someone means refusing to let them destroy you. Marcus called a few times during those first months, but never to apologize or rebuild our relationship. He wanted money explanations, second chances he had not earned and did not deserve. I listened politely and declined, gently maintaining boundaries that felt strange at first but grew stronger with practice. The children sent me drawings, sometimes pictures of houses and flowers and stick figure families that Emma addressed to Grandma Kathy. I kept them on my refrigerator and tried not to think about how they were being taught to understand my absence from their lives. I learned that Christmas dinner had taught me the most valuable lesson I could have received at 58 years old. Self-respect is not something you can give away to keep peace in your family. It is not a small sacrifice you make to avoid confrontation. It is the foundation upon which every other relationship in your life is built, and when you allow someone to demolish it, you lose far more than just your dignity. Sometimes the people who claim to love you will test that foundation with small compromises and reasonable requests. They will ask you to move aside to make room to understand that circumstances have changed, and perhaps you should consider adapting to new realities. They will smile while they strip away pieces of your identity, always with your best interests at heart, always with logical explanations for why you should be grateful for their intervention. But love that requires you to disappear is not love at all. It is convenience disguised as affection control, masqueraded as care. Real love creates space for people to exist fully as themselves, not demands that they shrink to accommodate someone else's comfort. I think about Frank often in my new life, especially during the holidays. I believe he would be proud of the woman I became after losing him, proud that I found the courage to protect the legacy we built together from those who would have squandered it for their own purposes. The house where we raised Marcus, where we hosted countless family gatherings, where we dreamed about grandchildren who would run through those same rooms. That house now provides affordable housing for young families who appreciate what they have been given. Sometimes I drive by and see children playing in the backyard where Marcus once had his swing set, and I know Frank would approve of this ending to our story. What happened at that Christmas dinner taught me that the greatest gift you can give yourself is the refusal to participate in your own diminishment. Sometimes, saying no to the people you love is the most loving thing you can do because it shows them that there are consequences for treating someone's heart like a commodity to be traded for social advancement. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family members tried to make decisions about your life without considering your feelings? How did you handle it? Please leave a comment below sharing your story because I know I am not the only one who has faced this kind of betrayal from people who were supposed to love and protect me. If this story touched your heart or made you think about your own family relationships, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more real life experiences. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they have the right to stand up for themselves, no matter who is asking them to step aside. Thank you for listening to my story and for reminding me that there are people in this world who understand the importance of treating each other with dignity and respect. I wish you all holidays filled with genuine love and appreciation for the people who matter most in your lives. Remember, you teach people how to treat you by what you are willing to accept. Choose wisely and never let anyone convince you that you should be grateful to disappear from your own life.